think it's probably about that time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure whoever. Well, do I have like a button or anything? Did they coach you on push the button, or do we just go?
No, we
It's
just go.
always
You
recording.
just go. Yeah.
Okay, well that's going to be a really awkward first 30 seconds of the YouTube video. So hello YouTube, and everyone watching in the future. Um, my name is Ryan Price, and over here is Mishaya Mitchell.
Hello. Mm-hmm.
We made a super weird game for DrupalCon, and we're going to talk about that and some game design theory and maybe some things that web developers can learn from game designers. And then we'll get to play a game. If you haven't already, that's okay. There'll be time to do that too. And maybe have a lively discussion afterwards. So who's this guy? I'm Ryan Price. I'll go by Liberator on a lot of the internets, including Drupal.org. You can find me there. I've been doing Drupal for quite a long time. I'm also the organizer of the Pacific Northwest Drupal Summit, which is happening in Portland this year. And I put here some of my games like Myst, XCOM 2, Half-Life 2, Psychonauts, Life is Strange, and also in the old school camp is Chrono Trigger. So
Mm.
lots of these have a lot of heavy story elements, which is one thing that I really like about them. Some have some more like traditional platform or shoot 'em up game mechanics, but I think the story is really heavy on my list of things. And Mashaya, I will let you do your own.
Wonderful. Hello, my name is Mishaya Mitchell. Um, I am actually a 3D environmental artist who learned to code because I'm stubborn. And when I have a project that I want to get done, I'm just going to code it myself. So I'm always looking for the next challenge. I met Ryan at the Seattle Drupal Summit, actually talking in a completely different talk about what does it mean to be raised during a digital age. Um, as for this project, it's done in Unity. I have an Unreal background, and so if you know what that means, it means that I like real-time high-def graphics. And if you've already played the game, you're like, that's definitely not this, and that's because it's with mobile WebGL, which is a really interesting feature that we will be talking more about because it's only been out for about 7 months. So it's been a really interesting process of pushing it to the max of what it's allowed to do. And let's just keep talking because I'm really excited about getting to the game. So next slide.
So yeah, what is this all about? What are we talking about today? We built a game for DrupalCon. The basic idea would be, if you remember the little paper passport they give you when you register that says, if you walk around the expo hall, you can visit these 25 things, and if you, each one of them gives you some sort of a cookie or a signature or a stamp, then we'll enter you into a contest. It's a way for the participants to engage with the sponsors. And I said, that's interesting, but could we have the participants engage with other parts of the conference and other parts of the information around the conference? And maybe we could eventually get some sort of a interactive space where knowing what sessions that you wanted to attend would be incorporated in that experience somehow, or how do I get to the boss rooms and things along those lines. So there was some ideas that we had that are done in an extremely rudimentary fashion at this point, but it's meant to be a jumping off point, a conversation starter for could we do something interactive and 3D in the future. So one really weird thing about this project is when we create a website, a lot of times we go to someone who has created a business or they have created a product or they've created a story that they want to tell, and we just have to help them uncover the truth of whatever it is that they are wanting to sell or engage with their audience. But in this case, it was inventing something out of whole cloth. This has never been done before. We know what DrupalCon is, but what does a digital DrupalCon look like? We don't know. So we kind of invented all of this on our own, and I said it should probably have a little bit of a theme to it. So it's got a little bit of cyberpunk. You'll see some of the characters that Mashaya designed in there, and that's in there. And we said, in a similar way to how you have on the passport, there are achievements that you can earn. In the case of people sitting in this room right now, those achievements will come around by entering the codes into the little text box. When you find one of the clues in the room, they're very obvious right now. You find one of the clues, you solve a puzzle, or you talk to a sponsor, or you attend a special event, you could be given one of these codes. We thought about doing QR codes, but we decided that QR codes are getting creepy now. So let's just do something that's really easy and text-based, and we can validate yes or no it worked. And the activity is to walk around in the expo hall, learn some things about Drupal, learn some things about the conference, and there's one of the characters who will tell you things about what's happening in the keynotes, and then we'll also read you a haiku. So there's fun things like that. Do you want to talk a little bit about the technology that we use?
Yeah, I can. So, to clarify, the characters were actually provided to us by one of my good friends, Renee Zamudio. I just want to bring that up because I don't want to take credit for their work, and they're amazing, and there's going to be a link to their portfolio at the end of this presentation. But we ended up choosing to use Unity for this project, mostly because I have a game engine background, and so I wanted to use a game engine, and Unity 6 is the first game engine to come out with specifically mobile web support. So I have a background in desktop games. And so you can imagine it's going from what now feels like unlimited resources to I'm trying to get a 3D game to play on what feels like a 2010s computer. But what makes it possible is their support of body compression, which there's better videos for describing how body compression exactly works. But essentially, the bigger the file gets, the exponentially better it gets at compressing it. So it took a 5 gigabyte game and brought it down to, at the end, 30 megabytes for the entire thing. Like the browser just has to load the 30 megabytes and then the entire game is there. And so that's kind of the reason I chose to use Unity, and that's why we're using this game. The other thing about this game is it was made in a game jam style workflow. So we had probably like 2 weeks to code this game from nothing. So that definitely influenced some choices we had to make in the end. But yeah, it was an interesting challenge of how do you get a 3D environment to load on a mobile browser. And 6 months ago, it was considered impossible. So
we'll also talk about some things that are theoretically possible, but not implemented in the current game, which is, right now, if you play this game and then you hit the refresh button, everything resets back to 0. The intention for the future would be when you finish one of the badges, that would get saved to your session inside the game, and then the game would then send a JSON object to the web page it's sitting inside of, and like a service worker could then tell Drupal, hey, please update the profile with the following information. It's not implemented right now. That's the really short version. But we're going to have some more slides about that in a little bit. So things like, your user data, like what's your Drupal.org username? Potentially we could integrate with the Drupal.org has a single sign-on system now, which would be interesting inside of this conference. But a lot of places where you might play a game inside of a conference, there's probably already an authentication system or a registration system that you would want to integrate with. So thinking about that level. Some of the game assets, so we've had ideas where, let's say, go to a birds of a feather session and have people actually generate some assets for the game. So like, take a picture of your t-shirt. We could incorporate that t-shirt into some of the characters in the game. Take a picture of yourself, and maybe it doesn't show up on the face of the character who's really, really small, but when you see a dialogue box between yourself and another character, now your face appears on the screen. And then additionally, one other thing I'll talk about in a minute here is some of the business logic. So for somebody like one of the sponsors, if they say, hey, I only want this to be valid on Tuesday after lunch because that's right after our session happens, and this information is not public until Tuesday after lunch, could we have that be recorded somewhere? And what I know now for sure about building a game in this style is that once you compile the game, it takes a long time to make a change and recompile something. So having the ability to download new information from a web service that can influence behavior of things in the game, if it's hooked up to be waiting for that information to be available, um, my idea of, on the web, we can change anything we want at any time we want. But in a compiled game, it requires us to go through a cycle, have a powerful enough computer available, generate the asset, upload the asset to the web server so that everyone can play it. And then in this case, it uses a progressive web app and the caching server. So then we also have to flush all everybody's caches and make sure that their browser doesn't remember the old version of the game. So there's a process to updating game. But if all I want to do is update business logic, my web developer self says we should be able to do that in our website, and then just make a small API call and say, have any of the business rules changed recently? Okay, great, I'm going to download those. So those are all things that are theoretically possible. Again, the game you're holding right now is a little bit more simple than that. So I talked a little bit about some games that I liked before. Other games that are sort of in this vein, like Broken Sword is a very old graphical walk-around adventure game. You have to pick up the rope, and then you have to combine the rope with the lantern, and then you have to swing that around in a circle to make someone believe that there's a ghost over here, and then that makes them leave their post so you can go over and walk past them and get to the jail and get the magic drink and pour it on the prison bars and all those kinds of things. There are those, and then also Pokemon Go is a more recent one. There's a couple of other games in that similar genre where as you walk around the world, you come across a landmark or a waypoint, or a random event happens, and now you have this encounter with a thing, and Pokemon Go would let you do augmented reality by, picking up where the ground is in the world and letting the Pokemon waddle up to you and say hello and things like that. So those are some of the things that we were using as our inspiration when we were going through some of this design process.
Mm-hmm.
You want to say anything else here?
Not currently. I would like to get to the demo. Yeah.
Demo. All right. How about we do the demo and we'll come back to some of this theoretical stuff. I'm just going to go to the slide that says demo. Okay. If you haven't seen this already, on this website, sunstormlab.com, there's actually two different versions of the game. One is the 3D version of the game where you walk around and talk to the non-player characters. And the other one is actually a fully text-based adventure of the game. It has all of the same dialogue content plus a couple of extra little goodies, but the means of traveling around the world is go north, go south, go east, go west. And it's all done inside the browser, and it uses a programming language which is called Ink. I think that was mentioned here, Ink. And it's an open source text editor that was created by some game developers that wanted to create this sort of choose your own adventure, text-based, story-based game. And they've actually used this. They do really great presentations at the Game Developers Conference, where they talk about how they started with this that was basically just a text-based adventure, but with a lot of graphics and animations and things thrown in there. And their philosophy of storytelling where you don't necessarily want to, pigeonhole a player into a certain style of play. So they kind of design for non-linear storytelling. And they essentially call out game developers for being too linear, even though their game is quote-unquote open world. You can only do things in a certain order in order to make them, manifest by the end of the game. So if you're interested in this kind of thing, I highly recommend checking out Inkle Studios and some of their presentations and their documentation. And the Ink editor is very easy to download. It's cross-platform. You can play around with it. They have really good examples on GitHub. And I am actually intending on releasing the source code for our story on GitHub so that people can play around with it also.
Okay, lovely.
So if you choose the text adventure, you'll see what those look like. If you choose the graphical adventure, you can see what those look like. I would say the graphical adventure, if you have accessibility issues that you deal with, or if your phone's not rendering it for some reason, first of all, tell us. But second of all, probably the text version will be a lot easier from an accessibility perspective. So we kind of wanted to do those show off, like, we can tell the same story in multiple different ways.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you want to add?
Yeah, now if we're playing the demo, you're going to see that there's tags on your tables. Normally, these would be at booths or during the expo hall, but we figured that it'd probably be easier to keep everyone in the room versus sending you out to find these tiny tags in a giant expo hall. So feel free to walk around the room, put in the codes, check out the end simulation. You'll get a different ending every time. It's cool. Thank you. We'll be around the room if you have any questions.
Oh yeah, we'll join back in a few minutes here. But I can just walk you around a little bit here. This is one of the characters you interact with. You hit this little speech bubble to talk to them, and you can choose one of these things to say, and they'll react to you. And as you hit this little speech bubble again, it sort of pages through the things that they're saying. That's pretty important to do. And then you can't close this window until you're done talking to them, and then once you're done talking to them, it goes away and you can move around again. So if you happen to do this on a desktop browser, try to get your whole play session in without switching windows, because there's some sort of a current thing with web browsers. If you switch off of this window and switch back to this window, you basically will have to reload the game because it's a web game and it works much better on mobile phones. So you can walk around here, and then you'll see the little tiny symbols around the room. So you can, if you come across one of those, maybe find the one that's nearest to your table where you're sitting. And then you can type in the right code here, which I think this one is like that. Oh, does it have to be capitalized?
Yes.
Okay. There we go. And then the bonus feature here is the end simulation button. Right now it is a random choice, I believe. But they're all...
There's logic behind it.
There is logic behind it.
Yeah.
So if you talk to certain characters and push certain buttons, I wasn't sure if we had gotten that feature in. If you talk to certain characters and push certain buttons, it will actually sometimes trigger some of the alternate endings. But once you hit that end simulation button, you're basically done playing the game. So if you want to close this, you got to click on the passport again. So that's the really basic controls there. If somebody wants to see, we can talk to one of the other characters. This is the guy that has to take his Zoom call. Are you going to go to a session? Oh yeah, what do you want to hear about? Recipes? So there you go. So this person pretty much always just has to get back on their phone call, which I thought was pretty useful because they got their little like AR headset on. You never leave Zoom. Are you going for all the codes? I like it. All right, so while that's happening, I think we can probably go back to the slideshow for a little bit. Slideshow. There we go. All right. We'll jump back in. So some of the ideas behind this game actually came from an idea I had a really, really long time ago when I was working at a co-working space, and I was having to juggle between trying to do my freelance work, trying to greet people as they entered the space, take phone calls. You know, there's the coffee machine going off all the time, and then every day at about 5, 6 o'clock, an event would start. And so when everything I was working on was then taken over by moving the tables and chairs around the setup for the event. So this idea of a person that was constantly having to juggle their work and also talk to people and, you know, like be a friendly face to people that were coming in the door definitely was inspiration for things that happened during a DrupalCon and trying to, you know, meet new people, learn things, go to sessions, go to BOFs, drink coffee. There's definitely always drink coffee in there. One of the characters here definitely likes coffee. That's what we know. Yes, never lavender. And then a couple of years ago, I was working on a client project that was actually building back-end web services for a game, and they had their old app was a cross-platform game that was built in PhoneGap. So PhoneGap, it was like you write this code once, but it deploys onto iPhone or onto Android, and they had decided their next app they were going to write everything in all native, so like Swift for iPhone or Kotlin for Android or React for the web. So they were basically tripling their work for some reason. Um, and then they wanted to have web services on the back end that would sync everything together. So, keep track of your user profiles, keep track of what new digital hat your character was wearing, and what games that you had been playing. Not necessarily like what was the outcome of an individual game, but the act of completing one of these games needed to be recorded in a database somewhere. Because if you played a certain number of these games and earned a certain number of, funny money, then you would qualify for some extra achievements and extra prizes like that. But how will you create business logic that works on all of these different platforms? So at the time, ECA had just come out. So I said, I think you could probably do something with BPMN here, where we will create the different bubbles, essentially. There's events, conditions, actions, and there's like forking logic that you can do inside of ECA. If you don't know the ECA Drupal module, nope, okay. I didn't have any more slides about this. If you don't know the ECA Drupal module, it's definitely worth looking up. I'm sure that there are going to be some good ones from this DrupalCon. You can go back and watch the videos. And it's possible to make your own custom events. Essentially, most of the conditions and actions that you would need are already built into ECA, but custom events would be the main thing that you would have to create there. So, one would be like input comes from the API, but instead of just generically input comes from the API, you could say like player completed game, player updated profile, player met a new NPC, player added NPC as their best friend, like what things that you wanted to do inside of there, and then now your web-based system can react to those in-game events, and as we say, feed that data back via the API to whichever client you happen to be using, and they really wanted there to be essentially cross-play compatible. So someone might have an iPad and an Android phone, or an iPad and a web browser, and they wanted it to work everywhere. And first of all, I looked at the client and said, this is a whole lot of scope, and I don't recommend it, but if you are willing to go through the hassle of building it, I will tell you a good way to do it. And so this is what we came up with. Another thing that we'll do here is, like, let's say, what are things that game designers can teach to web developers? I don't know, maybe it helps, Mashai, if you can actually see the slides here, but I'm going to stand up.
I remember them. So when you're designing a game, there's lots of concepts to keep in mind. Truthfully, I think good game design can't be summed up in a quippy one-line quote. Game design, like 30 seconds of fun. It's the idea that games should be fun within the first 30 seconds. It's setting expectations and UI and making sure that it makes sense when you first open the game, making sure that you can navigate. However, ultimately, I think a lot of stories, and it really depends because I'm not talking about like Pong, but a lot of stories come down to story. Like, what's the difference between a website and a video game? Like, a website could be a video game if there was a story behind it. Like, I've played some really cool video games that were just simply a website where you were trying to discover a murder. That were just like, you could open up the cookies or anything like that. It's like, we all like playing. And that's the point of video games.
My favorite game to play on some of these video hosting services is How Do I Unsubscribe?
Oh yeah, great game. Yeah. But
This is goal setting.
Goal setting. As we talked about a little bit before, video games kind of have a different, when you go to a website, you tend to have what you want to do already planned in your mind. Like, for example, if you went to the city of Portland, you're like, I want to figure out when my trash needs to be picked up. So you go to the website and you want it to be easy. You You want to find the trash pickup. But when you go to a game, it's kind of the inverse. You're kind of going to the game being like, what is my goals? And so as the game maker, you have to think of like, what are fun goals that I can set for the user that they're going to enjoy? And so the key concept of how can I make this an enjoyable experience is the same, but like how your user approaches the game is different. Anyone have any questions?
Yeah.
Going to the next one.
I think this is a good time to open up to questions, but we definitely have more of the game type content that we can read off. But I don't know, is anybody seeing something interesting while they're playing the game? Or there's definitely a couple of typos in some of the dialogue there, but hopefully it's not too confusing.
I did it.
You did it?
Woo.
You did all the codes?
Yeah.
What ending did you get?
Doom scroll.
You got the doom scroll.
Classic. Yeah. Very good.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
So as far as like, if this was an official part of DrupalCon, maybe by a round of applause, would you be interested in doing this instead of a little piece of paper with stamps on it?
Yeah.
We're seeing.
Oh, yay. Okay.
Okay. Everyone in this room, you're all signed up for my Patreon now. Yeah, we've actually shown this to a couple of people from Drupal Association already, and they thought that it was a really good idea. That doesn't mean that we're definitely doing it, but it's a possibility. So that could be a thing in Chicago. We'll see what happens. Maybe not any sooner than that, unless something magical happens.
Not any sooner than that.
You know, some other things that we think about when we're doing game design is this concept of show don't tell. That it used to be with 1980s type video games or arcade games, someone had to show you how to play, right? How did you know how to do the combination move in Killer Instinct? You had to read it in a magazine, or your friend had to teach you how to do it, right? There was this like hidden layer to everything that goes on, but as web designers, we try to make all of the information and all of the things that you would need to know essentially apparent to a lay person, right? Or based on the skill level of the person, the education level of the person who's attending, right? If you look at something like a lot of government websites, we have a certain reading level that we're targeting, or maybe there's certain languages that we're targeting, right? The languages are definitely part of the difficulty level of using a website. But then you go to something like games, and they invent their own new languages. So they're introducing new difficulty level that you would probably never do inside of a website unless you have someone who insists on, referring to things by the terms that the internal corporation uses, and we've never had a client like that before. I actually worked on a site one time that was for a printing business, and they had a lot of very specific words that they like to use for the materials they were printing or the way that they got run, and I said, nobody knows what these words mean. Like, I now have to sit down and teach myself new vocabulary terms just to come here and buy one of those little election signs. Like, it should say election signs. That's what most people use them for. Why does it say this other word? It just didn't make any sense to me. So another thing I think about is, in skill levels, for us as web developers, has anyone here ever just typed /admin/config/site information into the address bar? How many of your regular, site administrator users are going to just have the URL memorized, right? We're operating on a totally different level up here versus our end users. They want to have everything displayed to them in a menu or a dashboard, or some people are only just going to click on the big pretty picture. The CTAs, instead of having to dive through the menus to find the events listing. So those are things that web pages have, where the game interface sort of has to unveil things to you and breadcrumb. They can't show you all of your goals all at once. Even in the first hour of playing a new game, they're going to teach you one little bit at a time. Here's how you swing a sword, and you have to collect money, and you can go into the shop, but there's a thing here and it's too expensive. Therefore, you must discover how to go out into the world and collect new gems. So someone has thought about that onboarding experience and spent time thinking about the user experience of going through the game and developing your skills as a player of whatever thing it happens to be, in order to, achieve the goals that they're setting out for you. Allowing you to choose your own way through the game, or are we just going to, put you side-scrolling automatic movement linear through the thing, and oops, I got to shoot all the aliens. Um, those are two different ways of doing things, and one is really good for dopamine, and one is really good for people who like storytelling type games. Depends on what the goal is at the time. Getting feedback from the game, right? There's lots of ways you can get feedback, like you earn another coin, or the finish him text shows up on the screen, right? That's feedback that says you did the combo correctly. Now you just have to do the last little bit, right? You're almost there. So there's lots of ways in which, with sound, with visuals, and with haptics, right? A lot of game controllers have vibration controls, and I think that's something we can possibly do on a web-based device too, at least on mobile. As far as I know, there's no laptops that have a vibration motor built in, but I think that would be awesome, actually. Like, sorry, your battery's about to die. I would actually, okay, I need to build that now. That sounds like something that's totally achievable. And the overall storytelling, a professor of mine in college actually used to say, it's the story, stupid. And it didn't just apply to games, it didn't just apply to videos, it also had to do with what is someone going to tell to their friend after they've used this, right? I go through this experience, I had this terrible experience trying to cancel my Paramount Plus subscription. And I'm going to tell people, like, don't sign up for Paramount Plus, it's impossible to quit, right? That's part of the user experience of your site, and you have no control over that. So these are things that are going to be happening regardless, right? And a lot of these things have a feedback form, the little thing that pops up, or the AI chatbot that says, please tell me what you were working on today. Those are all things that count as part of your user experience. Here's another fun project that I got to work on a little while back. This was a college study abroad program, and as you create a profile, there's a lot of steps that you need to go through before you can register yourself and actually visit another country for 3 months, 6 months to take college credit. And what we ended up doing was we turned it into a little bit of a game. We've got this progress bar across the top that shows you where are you at in the journey and what's your next step. So you can see there's like the little blue circles, like you've done this, little white circle, this is what you're about to do. And then there's like lighter shades as you go along for like, you're not here yet, but it's coming. We're telling you what the whole process is. You have a sense of how long it's going to take before you ever really get too far down the path. So I definitely feel like this is a gamified website, even if there's not like points and games specifically. We're kind of hitting you over the head with the information. And as you went through this process, first was just give us your email address. Maybe at this point I'm interested in going to Spain, or I'm interested in going to Australia, or whatever it happens to be. Maybe you don't. And if you haven't done that yet, then there's a custom block on the page that's going to show you, if you haven't decided, it's going to show you one status. If you have said, hey, I'm interested in Spain, or I'm interested specifically in the arts program in Spain, then we will actually show you little screenshots of Instagram photos that students who have gone on that same journey as you did last year, right there inside the dashboard. So that's dashboard number 1. Dashboard number 2 is now actually a completely different node in Drupal terminology. That shows you now a second version of that same dashboard. It's got the same progress bar at the top, but all the content below the dashboard changes for now you're at the next step of submitting your application. While you're submitting your application, we're going to show you a little checklist that says things you need for your application. You must upload this document, you must upload that document, and then after you're finished with that, you have to submit. You can't submit until everything's completed. There's a percentage bar along with that. Once that's done, somebody who works for your college has to look at your application and make sure that you don't have any administrative red marks on your profile. So there's all these different stages that you have to go through and some of them you don't have any control over, but you can always come back to this dashboard and see where you are in the process, get a really clear picture of what's going on, and also get excited about going on your trip. And a lot of people end up sort of canceling out of this process as well because they don't have the money or they didn't meet the academic, grade GPA requirements or something, so they might want to come back and go through this process again. So we also made it so that we could reset this status back to 0 if you decide to apply again next year. And so that was, something you don't always think about. Is like, yeah, we're going to build this whole system, but I also need to be able to hit the reset button. Start a new playthrough of my game. And I guess I did put some Drupal-specific things on the slide too. So I did something very similar to what you would see on like a workflow, where I said you cannot transition from state A to state B unless something has happened, and you can never transition from state B directly to state F. That's not allowed. So that would be a good example of this. On the actual user profile, like inside the user entity, there's a workflow field there. But in these days, I might actually look at something like ECA for deciding what those rules are, because it's a little bit more flexible. And then also, some of the fields that we used there, we actually used a functionality of Drupal that's called bundle classes. So this is a thing where if you have a node, you can actually say all nodes of type event might have some extra business logic around them, so that whenever someone tries to update something, I'm not going to put the logic for that inside of the form logic, because maybe an API is going to come by and try to update my node, and the form logic doesn't get interpreted when you update something through the API. But if you use bundle code, which is a really, really interesting little thing that was added sometime in the Drupal 8 lifecycle, you can have functions that run every time a node gets updated, but only when it's of this certain bundle, aka content type. But it works on any entity in Drupal, so users can use it, which is what we did here. Users don't have bundles, they just are a user. So when I did the bundle class for user, it's really for all the users. So extending out the core entity types, but through code inside of Drupal, meant that I could then also add unit tests onto that functionality. Unit testing form logic is not as much fun. So there's things like that we did there.
Okay, so we're actually running out of time.
Yeah.
So we're just going to stay on this slide. If anyone has any questions about making the game, 3D modeling, using Unity with like WebGL mobile, please feel free to ask them. Yeah, I'm just going to open up the floor for any questions. None? Okay, then I'll just talk about low poly modeling. As I talked about before, as you can see the design iterations, we have the concept art, the storyboards, the characters. This project, like, it's kind of a game dev thing, playtest, playtest, playtest. Though this is our first like formal playtest with multiple people all at once. As for it, yes.
When you're thinking of a game idea, how do you decide like what's your MVP, right? Or what would be your primary goal, so you don't bite off more than you can chew?
Yeah, I'll repeat the question. When you come up with a game idea, how do you decide like what's the minimum viable product? How do you decide what core functionality to build?
So early on in this project, Ryan brought up the fact that when I came onto this project, the main goal he told me about was getting a player to go from point A to point B. And so that was my primary goal when building this. When we're talking about like the actual like goals around this game, that would be a really good question for Ryan.
Even just in general, though.
Even just in general? Well, it depends what kind of game you want to play. We're doing a 3D world where you need to be able to interact with characters and you need to be able to somehow check in. And so my main goal was to have a character that can walk around in an environment that was at least a little bit fun and interact with characters with dialogue. And so in this game, I used a single instance architecture to create a very simple dialogue system within Unity that then influences like you're ending by helping choose from a random array of photos based off game logic. That was one of the goals. And then the other one was, how do I get a character to be like, not a character, but you, a person, to be able to input something so that you can somehow mark that I was here, I did this, I found this. And so we went through a couple iterations of the QR code, the text input, and we ultimately went with text input just because it's the easiest for cross-platform. Though we did run into a very specific bug with Unity and the iOS keyboard, where there's an accessibility feature built into iOS. When interacting with WebGL, it will zoom in and keep you zoomed in. And so in the JavaScript, you have to basically lock the canvas. So it ended up being a very simple solution. But again, we are working with a feature that's less than, well, now it's only like 7 months old. So it's really like, what is the bare minimum I need for a play test and a beta test? It's a character that can do things within the game, essentially, yeah.
That word 30 seconds of fun comes up a lot when you're talking about this kind of level of like, how do I decide what to work on? So in Tetris, the achievement is I completed one line, right? That's a good example of like, if I could make it so that one line is finished and it disappears, I've maybe reached my something is working, stage. Like, do I need to have the speed increase over time? Probably not yet, right? I just need to get to the point where thing is falling, I can position the piece, it will lock into place, and then the game can recognize that this is a complete line and it's finished now. In Zelda, they talk a lot about like, for the first time you kill a monster, or the first time you collect a coin, that is somewhat like the most basic activity that you can do. In something like a side-scroller game, jumping on the heads of the monsters, or going through a pipe, or collecting a coin is also really similar in there. So there are also other games that are sort of like pure story. So it's just sort of like, if you feel like something has happened, then the story is advancing itself. There's games that can actually like, their whole point is to sort of like make you have a thought. So there's games that happen sort of like during the revolution in Spain, right? And your whole point of that game is to just feel like you were there. It's almost like watching a documentary, but in an interactive way. Or there's a game I know you've played before. It's called That Dragon Cancer.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what's the basic idea of the Dragon Cancer.
It's about, so you're a child and your mother has cancer, and it's yeah, it's really depressing, and it's played through blinks. So you as a player, it uses your camera, and every time you blink, you get further and further along with your mother's life until she dies. Like that's the game.
So I guess the point of the game is to make you cry.
Yeah, the point of the game is, how can I creatively tell a story? And it was the creator, it's like themselves, like what they were trying to do was process their own grief and process what it felt like to have only glimpses of their mother's life, and like try to capture it, but also give that feeling of fleetingness. And so another way you can think about it is the same way that like books and movies are completely different mediums, but you can tell the same story. Games are the same way. And so how you're able to convey what you want to convey completely changes. Like, you can't blink your way through a book or blink your way through a movie. You could definitely try. And actually, now that I think about it, everyone blinks every day away, which is kind of the point. But like, you can't like that way through. It's ridiculous, but you can for like a video game. So I think it opens up the possibility of how you can tell stories, which is kind of like what this game is. Like, we started with something that is a piece of paper, and we thought, what if we made this into a video game? What could it look like? And we ended up with a 3D like RPG style game that I would argue is more fun than a piece of paper. But you could also be like, no, I like a piece of paper the same way I like to blink my way through a book. Like, I don't know. Yeah.
I really like the level design. There's a lot of like cool verticality and like little dead ends and little spots to check
Thank
out.
you.
I just want to know like what kind of thoughts went into like how big to make the level, what sections to add,
Of course.
what was that process like?
I'll repeat the question is, how did you decide on essentially the floor plan of the game and choosing to go up and down stairs, hit dead ends, and things like that?
So we wanted the game to be based off the expo level, the expo floor of this convention. And so I went online to the hotel and I found the actual map and I built out this game based off the level map. Did I get the stair direction wrong? Yes. But if you were to take this game out to the expo hall and start walking around, you'll notice that the booths and the cubicles line up. And so that was kind of my inspiration for what the level is going to look like. As for size, I was really thinking, okay, we're going to have an hour-long talk and we're maybe going to have 15 minutes. So every time I would add the new feature, I'd see if I could get everything done in 15 minutes. And that was kind of my how many nooks and crannies can I add? Actually, not that many because it takes a while. It also comes down, an interesting thing is player speed. Have you ever played a video game and you're like, oh my God, my character walks so slow. Why don't I have map jumping? And I'm like, I don't want to code in map jumping. So I spent time and thought about how fast can you move as the player? And then of course I added the jump feature in because I think every video game with a character should be able to jump purely for jumping, for no other reason. But there was a lot of thought that went into as a player, how do I experience this? And actually, if you notice the stairs, each side is correlated with the stairs in the expo hall. So that was my inspiration for the map. As for the style, I wanted to be weird and wacky. I was like, I have very little time, and instead of using a bunch of generic models, I'm just gonna make a big swing and do 2D graphics and interesting texturing, and I'd rather make something controversial than boring. So that was kind of my inspiration. As you can see, I did concept art for what I want it to look like. And I kind of messed around with the idea of how do you mix 2D and 3D in a cool 3D space. Because I love 2.5D, and I feel like ever since everyone's seen Spider-Verse, it's gotten pretty popular. Not that this is Spider-Verse in any shape of the word, but the idea of combining 2D and 3D is something that's always fascinated me.
Another thing too, we say death of 1,000 cuts. There's so many decisions to make. Should the camera be able to be moved? Should it follow you around? Should it zoom in? Should it stay in one place? There's a lot of choices you can make at every single stage, and at some point you just have to say, this is the one we're going with. And you look at some of these completely finished games, and they take 3 years to make, and dozens and dozens of people, and I understand why now. Mm-hmm. You always look at it that doesn't look that hard, but as you see just how much work goes into creating something this sort of small and self-contained, then taking that out and expanding it over time, this is a big undertaking.
How I like to put it is never use the word simple when doing anything with programming. Nothing is simple. You're going to always find some way that it's going to become drastically more complicated.
Just slap some GraphQL on it, it'll be fine.
Yeah, no. You just need to get it to move from point A to point B. It's simple. Yeah. Yeah, and then you're like, what do I do now? Not simple.
Cool. Like we said before, if you want to check out the Ink programming language, it's really fun to play with. You could make your own choose your own adventure game by learning some really, really simple syntax. There's actually really, really good YouTube videos on how to use this. And it's very fun. It's almost like writing YAML, but at the end of it, you now have created a choose your own adventure book. Like I said, I'll put out the source code for this on this same website, on the Sunstorm Lab site. We'll put that up there. I just didn't get a chance to put the button up yet. And a couple more links if you don't know about Unity. I think one question we were assuming people were going to ask is why not Godot? And it was really just, this is the one we were comfortable with, and also Unity has explicitly said they're supporting WebGL on mobile, which was a big attractor for us, that we didn't want anyone to have to download anything. You should just be able to play it right in the browser, right? I'm a web developer. I want everything to work in the browser. And then, yes, as Mashaya said, Renee Zamudio, you can check out their artwork.
Mm-hmm.
And then one really fun thing that is an inspiration here of maybe something we might be able to do in the future is the Pizza Hut Pac-Man pizza box. This is one of those things I was talking about with fiducial markers, where as you arrive at a certain place, you could maybe have an interactive experience that happens somewhere inside of the conference. But in this case, the experience is delivered to your front door. And so they brought a game to you. And if you have this special web page, you could then play 3D version of Pac-Man right on top of your pizza box. This was an actual promotion they did. This company, the Eighth Wall, part of Niantic, that does Pokemon Go, and what's the Google Ingress game and some other things like that. They have other projects, and one of them is Pac-Man on your pizza box. So I thought it was really cool. And thanks very much for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
I think there's a survey. I did not remember to put the link to the survey, but please fill out the surveys. I'm sure DrupalCon loves to hear the feedback. And maybe also tell them if you would like to have this be part of the DrupalCon next year, maybe include that in your survey too.